The land was scorched. Smoke still curled from blackened brush, and the air smelled like death. Buzzards circled lazily overhead, waiting. Taza guided his horse with care through the shallow creek bed, eyes sharp, ears open. The Apache warrior had learned long ago that silence didn't mean safety. He spotted the wagon just after midday, its wheels broken, its canvas ripped and sagging like skin over a corpse. One mule lay dead in the dirt, arrows still stuck in its side. The other had run off, judging by the drag marks of broken reins. Taza dismounted slowly. He didn't draw his weapon yet. He didn't need to. Whatever had happened here was finished. The violence was old now, at least a day, maybe two. But something in the stillness felt off. Then he heard it, a sound. So faint it might have been the wind shifting through a piece of torn cloth. But Taza didn't believe in wind like that. He moved toward the wagon bed, footfalls soft, like stalking. Pray. Inside, everything was in chaos, shattered crates, spilled grain, a broken rifle. And in the far corner, behind a barrel that had cracked clean down the middle, lay a large canvas sack. It twitched. He froze. Then it moved again. Taza's hand dropped to his knife. He crouched low, slipped forward, and cut the bindings with one swift motion. As the rope gave way, the sack shifted and opened, just enough for a face to appear beneath. A voice came first. Soft, strained. Please, take them off. Her voice was barely more than a breath. Her lips were cracked. Her cheeks smeared with dirt and blood. And across her eyes, a soiled white cloth was tied like a blindfold. Her wrists were bound in front of her with another length of rope, worn nearly through by desperate struggle. Then he saw her face, and everything inside Taza stilled. He knew her. Not just vaguely, not in passing. He knew her, Clara Maddox, the preacher's daughter, from the town of Dove Spring. Years ago, she'd been no more than a teenager with braided blonde hair and sharp green eyes, who had dared to hand him a tin cup of water when no one else in that place would even look at him without spitting. He had never forgotten that moment. It had been small, meaningless to her maybe, but to Taza, who'd been treated like an animal, not a man, it had been everything. Now she was a wreck of that girl. Her skin was bruised, her dress torn, clinging to her like ash on a dying ember. But those lips still moved. Please, she whispered again. Take them off. Taza reached for the blindfold. She flinched at his touch, instinctive and sharp. He paused. I won't hurt you, he said softly, in English. Her trembling slowed just slightly. She nodded. He untied the cloth, slowly. When it came off, her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. The sun was too bright. Her eyes had been sealed in darkness for too long. Taza pulled water from his pouch and tipped it to her lips. She drank like someone who didn't trust it was real. Where am I? She rasped. You're safe for now, he said. She tried to sit up. Her body gave out. Taza caught her before she hit the wagon bed. She was light, too light, and burning with fever. He scanned the horizon. He couldn't stay here. Whoever had done this to her might return. And if white men found him here, alone with a preacher's daughter in this state, they'd shoot him on sight. Maybe worse. Still, he didn't hesitate. He gathered her in his arms, wrapped her in his blanket, and carried her to his horse. She made no sound, no protest. She had passed out again, her head resting against his shoulder like a forgotten child. Taza tied her gently behind his saddle and climbed up. The canyon spring was a day's ride west, hidden, sacred, known only to a few. He didn't know what this meant yet, why Clara Maddox had ended up like this, or who had stuffed her into a sack and left her to rot like garbage. But he knew two things. First, this woman had once offered him kindness no one else would. Second, he would repay that debt in full, even if it killed him. He rode out fast and silent, the sun dropping low behind him, painting fire across the sky, unaware that the moment he opened that sack, both of their lives had changed forever. The canyon. Spring shimmered beneath a crescent moon, its waters cool and clean, fed by an underground vein that only a few Apache knew. Taza had brought her here not because it was safe, but because it was sacred, a place where even old warriors whispered their prayers and laid down their anger. If Clara Maddox had any chance at healing, it was here. He built a fire in the shelter of the rocks and laid her on a bed of pine needles and softened hides. She hadn't spoken once since they left the wagon. She drifted in and out of consciousness, moaning now and then, sometimes flinching in her sleep. Fever clung to her like a second skin. Her hands trembled. Her lips moved without sound. Taza worked through the night, grinding herbs, steeping roots, and wetting claws to cool her head. He dribbled water into her mouth, one drop at a time, then held her upright to coax warm broth between her lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. He'd seen worse wounds, worse spirits. But there was something broken inside her, too deep for any medicine to touch. At dawn, she opened her eyes. Not wide, not trusting. Just a narrow slit of green, watching him with fear that made his chest tighten. Where am I? He sat cross-legged nearby, sharpening a branch into a splint, though he didn't need one now. A spring. In the canyon west of Spring, he answered. Her eyes flinched at the name of the town. She turned her face away. Remember, a wagon, she said. I was tied. They put me in the sack. Taza waited. He didn't push her. Sometimes the memories came back like a flood. Sometimes like a single drop, they said. I was too much trouble, she whispered. That I talked too much, that I fought too hard. She coughed weakly. He brought her water again, lifting her head gently. They sold me for whiskey and bullets, she said, voice flat. And the next men didn't even want me. They just wanted the mule. They didn't even look at my face. Taza watched her. Not with pity, but with the weight of understanding. His people knew what it meant to be treated like property, to be stripped of dignity, to be caged. You recognized me, she said suddenly. Didn't you? He nodded once. She searched his face. How? You gave me water once, he said quietly. Outside the church. I was chased out of town like a dog. You ran after me. You said it wasn't right. She stared. A slow blink of memory flickering across her face. That boy, with the cut lip and the broken sandal. Taza's lips curled slightly. That boy. I never forgot your eyes, she said. Even back then, they didn't hate me. I never forgot your hand, he replied. It didn't fear me. They sat in silence for a long time. A breeze rustled the brush outside the canyon. A hawk cried high above. But in that space between them, something fragile had begun to take shape, not quite trust, but the outline of it. Why did you help? Me? She asked. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. Because you didn't leave me thirsty. Because no one else would have. But I'm not. She looked down at herself. The bruises, the torn fabric. I'm not worth anything. Now Taza's jaw clenched. He stood slowly and walked to the stream. He dipped his hands in and splashed water across his face before turning back to her. Your worth doesn't belong to them, he said. They can't take it, even if they tried. Her lips quivered. Not from cold, from something deeper. Shame, grief, hope? I don't even know what day it is, she said, pressing her forehead into her hands. I don't know who I am anymore. You're Clara Maddox, he said, without hesitation. You gave water to a boy who had nothing. You made him feel like a person. She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. And now? Now, Taza said, kneeling beside her, I help you remember who you are. For the first time since he opened that sack, she didn't flinch when he touched her hand. She gripped his fingers like a drowning woman grabbing hold of something solid. And Taza, who had never intended to be anything more than a shadow in her life, realized he might have to become her anchor, whether he meant to or not. The days passed slowly in the canyon, each one marked by quiet tending, small meals, and the slow return of strength. Clara still woke in a panic sometimes, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with fear, but the tremors in her hands had lessened. Her voice, once thin and fragile, had grown stronger. Not defiant yet, but steadier. Taza remained close, always within reach but never imposing. He brought wild berries and cooked rabbit meat, steeped teas from canyon herbs to ease her pain, and told her which ones would fight infection. But he never asked for her story. She gave it anyway. That morning, Clara sat with her legs tucked beneath her on a blanket near the fire. Her long hair, finally free of tangles, fell like pale rope down her back. She clutched a steaming cup of tea, staring into it as though it might hold the answers she still didn't understand. "They left me to die," she said suddenly. Taza was kneeling near the water's edge, cleaning a strip of hide. He paused, not looking up, letting her speak in her own rhythm. "There were 3 of them at first, men I knew. One had come to dinner with my father. Another worked the livery. When they grabbed me outside town, I thought maybe they just meant to scare me. Maybe it was a mistake." She laughed, but it was hollow. "It wasn't." Taza's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "They blindfolded me right away. Said it'd be easier if I didn't see. Easier for who, I never figured out. They tied my hands, shoved me into a wagon, and rode hard through the night. I could smell whiskey. Heard them laugh. Heard them talk about what I might be worth to the right kind of man." She sipped the tea. Her hands didn't shake. "The first camp was far off in the woods. They kept me tied to a tree. Fed me just enough not to die. The man they were. Going to trade me to changed his mind. Said I was too much trouble. Too loud. Too proud. Didn't like my eyes." Taza looked up at her now. Clara's voice went flat. "They sold me for a mule and 3 bottles of rye." Silence stretched between them like a taut string. The next group, they didn't even want me. I heard one of them say, "Just stuff her in a sack. Drop her by the river if we run low on food." But the younger one, he tied the sack gently. I remember that. I remember the way his hands didn't shake. He didn't say much. But he left a piece of bread next to me when he thought the others weren't watching. Her lip trembled. I wanted to hate him. But I think maybe he was the only one who knew I wasn't going to make it. Taza stood and walked toward her, slow and careful. He knelt by the fire, staring into the flames. "You lived," he said. "Barely," she whispered. "That's enough." She looked at him sharply. "Is it?" Taza nodded. "For now? You're alive. That gives you power they didn't want you to have." "What power?" "The power to remember, to speak, to decide what happens next." Clara looked down at her hands. The skin was still scraped and raw, but no longer bleeding. Her wrists bore the deep memory of ropes, but they were hers again. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she said. "You don't have to be strong yet," Taza answered. "Just willing." A gust of wind stirred the smoke from the fire, curling it around them. For a moment, she let herself lean into the warmth of his presence, neither touch nor promise, but a shared space of breath and silence. Then she looked up. "Do you think they're still looking for me?" She asked. Taza's single quotes S expression darkened. He pulled his knife from his belt and ran a whetstone over its edge once before answering, "No." That single word hit harder than a shout. "Because they think I'm dead?" He met her eyes. "Because they want you to be." Clara held his gaze. "Then I want them to know I'm not." Taza paused, then nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then we start with that." She set down her tea and stood slowly, her legs shaky but firm. She reached for the hide robe Taza had given her and wrapped it around her shoulders like a second. Skinned, no longer a prisoner, not quite whole, but alive, and choosing. And that was the beginning of everything. Taza left the canyon before sunrise. Clara watched him disappear into the shadows of the ridges, his tall figure blending into the brush and dust like a ghost. He didn't say where he was going, only that he would return by nightfall. She didn't ask for more. Something in his eyes had turned harder since her confession the day before. Like a stone sealed inside. She spent the day tending the small fire and washing her clothes in the spring. Her strength had mostly returned, but her spirit still felt like something cracked. The silence gave her time to remember, and that wasn't always a gift. Taza reached the outskirts of Dove Spring by midday. His hair tied back, wrapped in a tattered serape, his face dusted with road dirt. He'd borrowed a worn hat from a trader weeks ago, and it cast just enough shadow to dull the sharpness of his features. He rode in slow, head down, passing through the edge of town like a drifting horseman. No one looked at him twice. Inside the saloon, the piano was out of tune and the laughter too loud for the hour. Taza ordered water at the bar, then sat quietly in a corner near the window, listening. It didn't take long. Did you hear? A man was saying 2 stools down. The preacher's girl's been missing near 3 weeks now. Missing? Another replied. I heard she ran off with one of them Comanche boys. Taza didn't blink, but something burned behind his eyes. No, the first one said, chuckling. They said she ran off after her fiancé dumped her. Preacher tried to keep it quiet. Said she was always too wild for a woman. Taza sipped his drink slowly. Sheriff's boy said she took the money from the donation box and left in the night. Shame, though, pretty thing, that Clara Maddox always had a mouth on her. A third man laughed. She's probably dead in a ditch, if she ain't been married off to some outlaw tribe. Taza stood quietly and walked out before his rage could speak for him. He crossed the road to the small church where Clara's father, Reverend Maddox, once preached fire and damnation with a silver tongue. It was quiet now, the doors open, but the pews empty. A single broom leaned against the altar. Taza waited. When the old man emerged from the back room, he paused, recognizing nothing and everything all at once. You here to pray? The Reverend asked stiffly. No, Taza said. The Reverend squinted. You look familiar. I used to stand at your door as a boy, Taza said. Your daughter gave me water. That gave the old man pause. Ah, the Apache boy. Your daughter is alive, Taza said plainly. The Reverend's face went pale. What do you mean? She was taken, traded, left to die. I found her. The preacher gripped the pulpit. You're lying. I'm not. She ran away. He barked. She brought shame to this family, to this town. She was taken by men from this town, Taza said, stepping forward. She told me their names, the Reverend trembled. If she's alive, then she should come home and make things right. She doesn't owe this place anything, Taza growled. Not after what it let happen to her. The old man's voice broke. You think I don't suffer? You think I don't ask myself if I could have done more? Taza turned away. You didn't even look for her. He left the church and rode toward the sheriff's office. He didn't stop or speak, just watched. The deputy, a young man with a gold star on his chest and a grin that never reached his eyes, leaned against the rail. His name was Caleb Jernigan. Clara had whispered it once in her sleep with fear. Taza studied his face. The deputy glanced toward the saloon, chuckled at something a passing woman said, and never once looked guilty. But his hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. He knew, that night. Back in the canyon, Taza said, little. He gave Clara food, helped her sit comfortably, then crouched near the fire. "You were right," he said. "They're not looking for you." Clara's face tightened. "Your father says you ran away. The deputy, he says you chose to leave. The town believes it, or pretends to." Clara nodded slowly. "Because it's easier than the truth." "Yes." She stared into the flames. "Then I won't hide anymore." Taza looked at her carefully. "You understand what that means?" She nodded. "If I speak, I ruin reputations. I humiliate a preacher. I bring shame to a town that wants to bury me. But if I stay silent, you disappear," he finished. She looked up at him. "I won't let them erase me." Taza's voice was steady. "Then we ride together. But it won't be easy." Clara met his eyes. "Nothing worth surviving ever is." And for the first time since the sack was opened, her face held something new: fury, not fear. The next morning brought a strange kind of calm. Not peace, not yet, but the breath before a storm. Clara woke early, dressed in the soft buckskin garments Taza had fashioned from deer hide, and stood barefoot in the canyon spring. The cold water bit at her ankles, but she didn't move. She let it sting. She let herself feel. This canyon had become her shelter, her sanctuary. She wasn't sure what she'd be without it. Behind her, Taza knelt by the fire, sharpening his blade and humming a low, steady tune in Apache. It soothed her more than she expected. "I'm not used to silence meaning safety," she said, breaking the morning hush. Taza looked up, eyes calm. "That's because silence has always been the sound of danger for people like you." "For people like me." Clara stepped out of the spring, water dripping from her feet, and wrapped the woven blanket around her shoulders. "How long have you been coming here?" she asked. Taza thought for a moment. "Since I was a boy. My grandfather brought me after my brother died. Said it was where the water spirits washed sorrow clean." Clara sat beside him. "Did it work?" He nodded. "Some sorrow, yes, not all." A fire crackled between them. Clara watched the flames and spoke softly. "This place is the first one I've ever been where no one's told me what to be, what to wear, how to speak, what a good woman should act like." Taza raised an eyebrow. "And what did they say a good woman should be?" Clara smirked bitterly. "Silent, soft, obedient, pretty but not proud, smart but not louder than a man, modest but not too plain, pure but not difficult, and always, always forgiving." Taza gave a low hum, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "They ask for a ghost." Clara looked over at him. "Is that what you think I am?" He shook his head. "I think you are a storm that refused to blow itself out." She smiled for the first time in days. "A real one." They spent the afternoon gathering roots and tending to the plants around the spring. Clara followed Taza's lead as he showed her how to split firewood properly, how to spot snake tracks, and how to patch tears in leather. It was the kind of learning that required no classroom, just patience and repetition. At night, they sat side by side by the fire. Clara had started humming an old hymn her mother used to sing. She didn't believe the words anymore, but the tune felt like a thread to her past. Taza listened in silence, respectful. "You know," Clara said eventually, "I think I'd be dead if you hadn't come." Taza's face didn't change, but his voice lowered. "And I think if I hadn't opened that sack, I'd still be walking through this world with no reason." She glanced over at him. The firelight caught the line of his cheekbone, the dark intensity in his eyes. Not just a warrior, but a man with depth, with sadness and stillness. She saw him now in full. "You've been alone a long time," she said. He nodded. "I thought I was going to die in that sack," she said. "I prayed for it once. I begged for it. Not because I wanted to die, but because I couldn't bear." Another hand touching me like I was nothing. Taza's hands were folded in his lap. He didn't move to comfort her, didn't reach. But his voice came, low and certain. You are not nothing. You never were. Clara leaned slightly closer. You treat me like I matter. You do. I don't think I've ever mattered to anyone who wasn't trying to use me or break me. You matter to me. The words hung between them, raw, unadorned, honest. She reached out slowly, placed her hand over his. He didn't flinch. They sat like that a long time. No more words needed. That night, Clara lay beneath the stars, wrapped in her blanket with her head resting near the fire. She stared up at the sky, wondering if her mother had ever seen this many stars, if her mother ever wished for something else. If she dreamed of running. Taza sat nearby, his blade resting in his lap, always alert. I'm not ready to face them, she whispered. Taza looked up at the sky. You don't have to be ready. You just have to decide you will. She nodded. Slowly, eyes glinting with firelight. I will. And in the canyon sanctuary between wind and fire, silence and strength, Clara Maddox began to reclaim her name. Taza was gone before dawn, moving like a shadow through the desert. He hadn't said where he was going, only that Clara was to stay hidden, stay quiet, and trust him to return. She didn't ask for details. Something in his face told her what she needed to know. This wasn't a journey for mercy. Back in the canyon, Clara tried to wait with patience. She chopped firewood, organized the few supplies they had, and practiced with the small pistol Taza had given her. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling, not from fear, from fury. She remembered every word those men had spoken while they thought she couldn't hear. Every filthy laugh. Every argument over whether she was too much trouble to keep. Every time one of them spit near her and called her dead weight. But she also remembered one voice, quieter, younger. A man who'd knelt beside the sack and whispered, Don't fight. They'll hurt you worse if you fight. He had left her a piece of bread once. She hadn't thanked him. Didn't want to. Still didn't. But she remembered. Taza tracked the men across dry hills and mesquite flats. The trail was old, but he knew their kind, careless, greedy, always talking too loud, drinking too long. He reached their camp by the second sunset. 4 of them, just as Clara had described. They'd set up near an abandoned rail outpost, the skeletal remains of a telegraph shack behind them. They laughed over a campfire, passing around a jug of whiskey like it was holy water. Taza didn't wait for darkness. He stepped into the firelight and said, Where is the girl? The camp went silent. One man reached for his gun. Too late. Taza shot the first man in the leg. He dropped screaming. The second reached for his rifle. Taza threw his knife, fast and low, catching him in the shoulder. He fell backward with a curse, clutching the blade. The third, young, shaky, stood paralyzed. Taza marched forward, gun steady. You traded her, Taza growled. For a mule. For whiskey. The man tried to speak. We didn't kill her. No, Taza spat. You left that for the heat and the buzzards. Please, the boy begged. I didn't touch her. I didn't want to. I gave her bread. I didn't. You did nothing, Taza said coldly. And nothing is worse than evil done in silence. He dragged the man to the fire and made him sit, his hands tied behind his back. The other 2 were still moaning on the ground. Taza didn't care. He wasn't there for vengeance. Not exactly. He was there for clarity. For Clara. You'll live, he told them. But you'll carry what you did. And if you speak a word about her, if you go near Dovespring or breathe her name, I will come back, and I will not leave you breathing. The boy nodded rapidly, tears streaming. Taza looked at the other 2, groaning in pain. Same for you. He left them bleeding and broken but alive. That was more than they deserved. When Taza returned to the canyon 2 days later, Clara was waiting at the spring, pistol in her lap. Her eyes sharp, she stood as he approached. "Did you find them?" she asked. He nodded. "Did you kill them?" Taza hesitated. "No," her brow furrowed. "Why not?" "Because death is quick," he said. "But fear, shame, that lingers. I made sure they'll carry you with them, forever." Clara stared at him. "I don't know if I wanted revenge, but I needed to know they didn't walk away clean." They didn't. She let out a slow breath, the kind that shakes loose. Something inside, "Thank you." Taza sat near her, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion but his eyes calm. They didn't expect anyone to care. That's how men like that survive. They count on silence. "Then we break it," Clara said. "We speak, we make noise. We don't vanish." He looked at her then not like a wounded thing, but like a woman sharpening into her own edge. "What will you do?" He asked Dot. She didn't hesitate. "I'll face them. I'll go back to Dova Spring. Not for their forgiveness, but so no one else has to go through what I did." Not in silence. Taza gave a single nod. "I'll ride with you." And as the canyon wind whistled past them, carrying the scent of ash and pine, Clara knew the truth. She wasn't healing alone. She had someone who believed her. Someone who had chosen her. And now, for the first time since the sack, she was choosing herself. Night had fallen softly over the canyon, wrapping it in a hush so complete it felt almost holy. Crickets hummed among the rocks. The fire cracked low and slow, casting flickers of gold and amber against the red stone walls. Clara sat close to the flame, knees drawn up beneath the old blanket Taza had given her. Her body still bore the marks of everything she'd endured, but the stillness tonight was different. Her skin wasn't crawling with dread. Her thoughts weren't racing. For the first time in weeks, her soul didn't feel like it was trying to run out of her body. Across the fire, Taza was silent. He carved something slowly from a small block of cedar, hands steady, eyes focused. He hadn't said much since he returned from tracking the man, but his presence was grounding. She could feel it in the way he breathed, in the way he never looked away too long, never let her be alone with the darkness. Clara watched the flame dance and thought aloud, her voice low. "Do you remember the first time you saw your own reflection again, after something terrible?" Taza didn't look up. "Yes, I haven't yet." That made him pause. He set the carving down carefully and met her eyes. "I know I need to," she said, "but I'm afraid I won't see me anymore. Just what they made." "You were never what they made," Taza said quietly. "They tried, but they failed." She bit her lip, hands clenching in her lap. "Then why does it still feel like I'm in that sack?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and warm like embers. "Because your body escaped first. Your spirit takes longer." Clara reached into her satchel and pulled out the blindfold, the one she'd worn for days, stained and stiff with old blood and dust. She stared at it, fingers curled around the fraying knot. "I kept it," she said, "not because I wanted to, but because I needed to remember. Needed to know I survived." Taza watched her, unmoving. She stood slowly, walked to the fire, and held the cloth above the flames. "I'm done remembering the pain," she whispered. "Now I want to remember the fight." She dropped it in. The blindfold curled and smoked, blackening, then flared into flame. Taza didn't speak. He let the act speak for itself. When Clara sat down again, there was a different weight in her shoulders, one less burdened by shame, one steadier. She looked at Taza in the shifting firelight, really looked at him. The scars on his arms, the steadiness in his hands, the way he never once asked her for more than she could give. He had protected her, listened to her, believed her. Not once had he acted like she was ruined. "Do you know what you did for me?" she asked softly. He tilted his head slightly. You gave me back my name. Not what people said I was, not what the men did. You saw me as Clara, just Clara. Taz's eyes didn't waver. It was always yours. She leaned forward slightly, and her voice dropped. Why haven't you touched me? He blinked, surprised not. Offended, not confused. Just searching. Because you've been touched without kindness, he said. And I would never take what isn't offered with peace. Clara nodded. And if I offered it now? He studied her carefully. Then I'd ask, if it's because you feel something or because you're still trying to prove you're whole. That stopped her. She smiled sad and soft and honest. Maybe a little of both. Taza didn't smile back, not yet. But his voice gentled even more. Then wait, he said. Until it's only one. She leaned back slowly, her heart pounding not with fear, but with something she'd almost forgotten. Respect, not just for him, for herself. I never thought a man like you existed, she said, and I never thought I'd be someone, a woman, like you would trust. They sat in silence again, the firelight warm on their faces. And in that moment, as the stars pushed their way through the black velvet sky, Clara realized that healing wasn't always a war. Sometimes it was two people sitting quietly by a fire, not touching, not speaking, just believing, and that was enough. For now, the sun burned hotter as Clara and Taza descended from the canyon toward the town of Dova Spring. Dust curled behind their horses, and silence rode with them, thick with things unsaid but understood. Taza rode a step behind, always watching her back. Clara didn't need to ask him why. She knew. She was going back to confront the lie that had nearly cost her everything. Back to the town that claimed she'd run off in shame. Back to the people who had looked the other way when she vanished. Back to Caleb Jernigan, the deputy, who'd said she was too wild to stay, and who now wore a tin star like it made him untouchable. But Clara Maddox wasn't afraid of him anymore. They arrived on the edge of town as the church bells rang for noon. The townsfolk glanced up, eyes narrowing, hands pausing mid-task. It wasn't often a Comanche warrior and a preacher's disgraced daughter rode in side by side. Gasps followed her. Then murmurs. Then silence. Taza remained calm, but his hand never left the butt of his knife. Clara didn't look left or right. She dismounted in front of the sheriff's office and strode inside without knocking. Sheriff Anders, a heavy, aging man who'd never once looked her in the eye growing up, stumbled to his feet. Miss Maddox? I want to speak to your deputy, she said. The room went still. Caleb Jernigan stepped from the back room, pale under his hat, surprise flickering into something darker. Clara? What the hell are you? You lied, she said flatly. To the sheriff, to my father, to this whole town. Clara, you ran off. I was taken. Her voice rang out like a whip crack. You told everyone I left with, Indians, that I was ashamed of my life. You knew the truth. You were there when they grabbed me. The sheriff turned sharply to Caleb. Is this true? Caleb's jaw clenched. I don't know what she's talking about. I screamed your name, Clara snapped, stepping forward. You looked right at me and walked away. You let them take me. You let them trade me like cattle. And you said nothing. The color drained from Caleb's face. Sheriff Anders moved between them. This is a serious accusation. She's telling the truth, Taza said from the doorway. Every head turned. I tracked the men who sold her. I heard what they said, what they bragged about. They weren't hiding, because they knew no one was coming for. The sheriff looked shaken. Clara, is this really what happened? I lived in a sack for 3 days, she said. I was blindfolded so I wouldn't see what they were going to do. I was passed between men like I was nothing. And Caleb. Jernigan stood by and let it happen. The room was so quiet, Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Sheriff Anders turned to his deputy. Well, Caleb, did you know she was taken? Caleb didn't answer. His hand twitched toward his belt. Taza moved instantly 2 strides and a hand on the deputy's wrist before the gun could rise. "Try it," Taza said low and cold. "And I'll put you in the dirt before you draw." Caleb's eyes darted around the room, desperate, cornered. "She's lying." "Then swear it on your badge," Clara said, voice shaking. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. "Sheriff." Anders exhaled slowly. "Take off your badge, Caleb." "What?" "Take it off, you're done." Caleb stood stunned, then ripped the badge from his chest and threw it at the floor. He stormed out the door, shoving past townsfolk who had gathered to listen. Clara stood there, not triumphant, just trembling. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't care what they thought. Not anymore. Later, on the steps of the church, her father approached slowly, hat in hand. His eyes were hollow. "I didn't know," Reverend Maddox said. "You didn't ask," she replied. "You believed the version that hurt less." He looked down, ashamed. "I thought I'd failed." "You did?" He nodded. "Will you come home?" Clara looked behind her at Taza, waiting beside the horses. She turned back to her father and said, "I am home." She walked away without looking back, and this time the town didn't stop. Some turned their heads. A few lowered their eyes. One woman whispered, "She's brave." But Clara didn't need their praise. She didn't need their permission. She had spoken. She had been heard. And now she was free. By the next morning, Clara Maddox's name was on every tongue in Dova Spring. Some whispered it like a scandal. Some spoke it like a prayer. And some, especially the women, spoke it like a warning that became a promise. The town had tried to bury her story. Clara had exhumed it with truth. Still, even truth comes at a cost. Taza stood beside her near the edge of the stables, watching as 2 older townsmen quietly hitched their horses and left town before dawn. He didn't know their names, but he knew the kind. They had friends in high places. Maybe in low ones too. "They're running," he said. Clara nodded. "Good, let them." She turned back to the stable where the young boy, Eli from the livery, was brushing down her horse. "You still want to ride west?" he asked her. "Yes," Clara said, tightening the strap on her saddlebag. "This town won't let me forget, and I don't need to stay where I've already been silenced." "Once." Taza studied her. "You've earned the right to stay." "And I've earned the right to leave," she said softly. "On my terms this time." A long pause. "What about your father?" he asked. Clara glanced across the street, where Reverend Maddox sat on the chapel steps alone, holding a folded note in his hands. Her letter. She'd written it at sunrise and left it by his Bible. "He chose his pulpit over his daughter once," she said. "I forgave him, but I won't wait for him to change." Taza said nothing. He understood. He too had stopped waiting for men to become better than they were. The wind carried a chill as the sun crested the horizon. Taza turned to her, his voice lower now. "You've spoken the truth. You've faced them. What do you want now?" Clara looked him dead in the eye. "I want to live. Loudly, kindly, fiercely. I want to be known not just for what happened to me, but for what I did after." He studied her face. The cut on her cheek healed into a pale scar, her jaw held tight with fire and grace. The girl in the sack was long gone. What stood before him now was a woman sharpened by survival, but not shattered by it. "You want to come with me?" she asked him suddenly. "You don't have to. I'd understand." Taza mounted his horse. "I didn't stay with you because I had to, and I won't ride beside you unless I choose to." He looked over and gave her a rare half smile. "And I do." Clara grinned brighter than she had in weeks. "Then let's go." As they rode through town, all eyes turned. No one dared speak, but the silence wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't heavy with judgment. It was reverent, uneasy, changed. A few women dipped their heads as she passed. One little girl even whispered, "Is that her?" And her mother, watching Clara's straight back and proud chin, said, "Yes, baby, that's her." By midday, they'd left Dove Spring behind. The canyon trails opened wide, the horizon blooming ahead like a path not yet walked. Tazia rode in silence for a while before asking, "You sure about the West?" Clara nodded. "There's land out there. Fresh starts. Places where I won't be the girl who was taken, but the woman who kept going." He nodded. "You'll need to register a claim. Build something. Start slow." "I know," she said, "but I want it to be mine. Even if it takes years." Taza paused. "And me?" She slowed her horse until they were side by side. "I don't need rescuing anymore, Taza. I know. But that doesn't mean I don't want you there," she said, her voice soft. "You don't have to fight for me anymore. Just ride with me." Taza let the wind carry his thoughts for a moment. Then he reached across and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'd ride with you into every rumor, every storm, every battle. But I like this part best, the ride that comes after." Clara smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "You know," she said, "they said I was too wild to marry, too loud to keep, too stubborn to silence." Taza raised an eyebrow. "They were right. And now," she said, "I'll use every part of what they feared to build something better." And they rode on, two silhouettes crossing into a future no one had carved for them. No longer prisoner and rescuer. Not victim and protector. Just equals, riding towards something real. Something earned. Something the world could never take again. Prairie stretched wide ahead of them, untamed, golden, and waiting. Days had passed since they left Dove Spring, and with each mile, Clara felt something fall away. The eyes that judged her, the men who silenced her. The pain she'd carried like a second skin. Now there was only sky, wind, and freedom. They'd found a patch of land near a shallow creek, where the cottonwoods bent with the breeze and the soil smelled rich. Not many dared to settle this far west. That was part of the draw. Clara didn't want a town that remembered her. She wanted to build something from the ground up, with her own two hands and on her own name. On the third morning, she stood barefoot in the dirt, eyes scanning the horizon. Behind her, Taza hauled timber from the nearby trees, piling it in rows. There was no rush in his movements, but there was purpose. This wasn't just shelter, it was a home. "Our floor will be made of cedar," he said, pausing beside her. "It holds warmth better and keeps out bad spirits." She smiled, wiping dust from her cheek. "I like that." He handed her a rough stake and a mallet. "You placed the first one," he said. She took it, surprised by how light it felt in her hand and how heavy with meaning. Clara knelt and drove the stake into the earth. A loud crack echoed as wood met ground. "This is our start," she said. Zia nodded. "And no one else gets to name it for you." By the second week, the first frame of the house stood tall. Clara learned to swing a hammer, to cook over an open fire, and to sleep without waking to nightmares. They worked side by side, speaking little, but communicating everything in glances, nods, and laughter. At night, they sat under the stars and planned. Not just the house, not just the land. The life, the future. Clara wanted to raise chickens. Maybe even plant peach trees if they could haul seedlings from a passing trader. Taza spoke of building a barn big enough for others who might come seeking. Shelter people who'd been left behind like they had. And one night, beneath the firelight, Clara whispered, "If we have a daughter, I want her to speak with a full voice. To know she doesn't need permission to be strong." Taza's eyes glimmered. "And if we have a son, I'll teach him to listen, to protect without owning, to ride beside, not ahead." Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "They'll never know what it's like to be forgotten," she said. "No," Taza agreed. "They'll only know what it means to be chosen." Months passed. Word spread quietly, respectfully, that Clara Maddox had not died, that the preacher's daughter had become a settler, a builder, a woman who'd turn pain into purpose. And every now and then, someone arrived at their homestead, a woman who had escaped a cruel husband, a man cast out for loving the wrong person, a boy who'd never been told he mattered. They didn't come for charity. They came because of what Clara had done. She didn't speak of the sack anymore. Not often, but it lived in the quiet way she looked people in the eye, in the fire of her voice when someone tried to speak over her, in the kindness she offered without hesitation because she knew what it meant to be invisible. Taza built a sign and hung it by the fence. Maddox Ridge. "Are you sure?" she asked, fingers brushing over the carved letters. "I am," he said. "That name survived what most wouldn't, and now it gets to rise." She swallowed hard. "Then it should stand?" One evening, as the sun dipped low and gold spilled across the prairie, Clara stood at the edge of her porch, looking out. Behind her was a cabin, a garden, a barn nearly finished. Beside her, a man who had never raised his voice, never asked her to be anything but herself. In front of her, everything. The world hadn't broken her. It had tried, but here she stood on her own land, in her own name, with fire in her spirit and peace in her bones. Someone would tell the story someday. A girl thrown away, a warrior who found her, a town forced to listen, and a future she carved with calloused hands and an untamed heart. Her name had been twisted, sullied, whispered in shame. Now it would be spoken with respect. Her name was Clara Maddox, and she never vanished again.